This episode of Diabetes Connections is brought to you by the world's worst diabetes mom. Real-life stories of parenting a child with type 1 diabetes. Available at Amazon as a paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Learn more at diabetes-connections.com.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
Hey, welcome to this week's Minisode. Something a little bit different. I've been doing these short episodes all year long for 2020, and this is our first interview type episode. But I wanted to get some information to you that I thought would be interesting and helpful and about patient advocacy. So we're going to talk about what's been happening with Patients for Affordable Drugs. I spoke about them last fall. They had put out a report, and I wanted to follow up on it. Of course, there's a lot of information in the news these days about the price of insulin. There were advocates at the State of the Union address. These are not the same advocates, but a lot of the same push. And I also want to talk about Spare a Rose. So let's do that first. Spare a Rose is an initiative that happens every year to help kids with diabetes in developing countries so that they can get insulin. It doesn't take a lot of money to help out, and it really does make a huge difference in the lives of these people around the world. Why is it called Spare a Rose? Well, back in 2013, a group of people in the diabetes online community realized that for the price of one rose for Valentine's Day, they could make a huge difference in the lives of children. So you spare a rose, you save a child. They've expanded it so that you can, spare quite a few roses. There are different ways to pay for this, but it's really a very simple concept. Where does the money go? There is an organization called Life for a Child, and they partner with diabetes centers in places like Rwanda, Mexico, India, to give critical supplies to young people who really have nowhere else to turn. Right now, this program supports 21,000 people in 42 countries. And the goal here, no child should die of diabetes. If you'd like to learn more, I will link up everything in the episode homepage. You can see pictures of the families that have already been helped. You can read stories of kids who need help, and you can find easy ways to donate. So if you can possibly spare a rose this Valentine's Day, it would be very much appreciated. We have done a lot on this in the past. I will link up a very fun episode we did a few years ago with Carrie Sparling and Scott Johnson and Bennett Dunlap, where we talked about this initiative. Gosh, it was probably 2015, maybe it was 2016, but it was a while ago, about learning more and why I really do urge you to consider taking part in Spare a Rose. While you're learning about that initiative, I also thought it was a good time to take a look at what's happening here in this country and what's going on with our community's struggle to get the word out about the price of insulin. And if you've been following a lot of this, it has really heated up in the last couple of years. It seems like a lot of state legislators are taking this on, but at the federal level, it seems like it is stalling. And, what can we do? Well, Patients for Affordable Drugs put out a report a couple of months ago now, and I wanted to follow up with them and learn more about what they're doing, what we can do, what can be done about the price of insulin. Because I think when many of us hear this, we feel like there's just nothing I can do. It's overwhelming. Politicians are just arguing. They're never going to get anything done. Well, that may be true, that last bit, but there is something we can do. So I wanted to talk to the founder, David Mitchell, and community organizing director, Lauren Stanford. I should note that since I talked to them, H.R. 3, which they're mentioning here, did pass the House. At the time of this interview, it had not yet passed, but the Senate has not acted. I reached out to Lauren to get an update on that, and she said that they need to pass a health care package by May, so they are pushing for them to include S-2542. It is less far-reaching than H.R. 3, she says, but would bring meaningful relief to many patients. This is also called the Prescription Drug Pricing Reduction Act, introduced by Senators Grassley and Wyden, and it has passed out of the Senate Finance Committee as of this taping in a bipartisan fashion. It has not yet passed the full Senate, and it includes the following. It would penalize drug makers for price gouging. It caps Medicare beneficiaries' out-of-pocket spending on prescription drugs, and it requires pharmaceutical companies to justify high prices. I will link up more information on this as well as H3 and the other items we talk about in the episode homepage. Here is my interview with David Mitchell and Lauren Stanford. David and Lauren, thanks so much for taking some time to come on and explain a little bit about this. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Stacey, for the opportunity.
Thank you for having us.
Before we talk about the report itself and what we can do as individuals, David, let me just ask you to explain a little bit about what Patients for Affordable Drugs is all about. Can you talk to us about the organization?
Yes. Patients for Affordable Drugs is the only national patient organization focused exclusively on policies to lower drug prices. We're independent, we're bipartisan, and we don't take money from anyone who profits from the development or distribution of prescription drugs. We do two main things. We collect patient stories, elevate those stories to policymakers and elected officials, and train people to be advocates for lower drug prices. And we are building a community of patients and allies that can be mobilized in support of policies to lower drug prices, both at the state and federal levels. My wife and I decided to do this because she's a cancer survivor. I am a cancer patient. I have an incurable blood cancer. My drugs are very expensive. They're keeping me alive, but they're keeping me alive at a list cost of $875,000 a year right now. And just one of my drugs, an oral cancer drugs, carries an out-of-pocket cost of more than $13,000 a year. So we have a personal experience here, and we're trying to bring that experience to bear to mobilize folks who are struggling with high drug prices, whether it's for cancer drugs or Crohn's disease drugs, inflammatory drugs, insulin. There are millions of people who are struggling, and we're trying to help them have a voice and get something done that will actually lower the prices of drugs.
Was it your personal experience with your cancer diagnosis that led you to start Patients for Affordable Drugs, or had you been doing this and then this happened?
I had been doing health policy work in Washington, D.C. for about 30 years. Then I got cancer, and my experience as a patient was really searing for me to find out how difficult high prices could make trying to manage a chronic disease or stay alive with an acute deadly disease. And I became increasingly frustrated because there were no patient groups speaking out about drug prices. Literally, one day I woke up and I had an epiphany, and it was, hey, maybe if nobody else is going to do this, you should try. And that morning, I went downstairs and talked to my wife and said, honey, can I retire? Can I work for free? Can we put in some of our own money and try and build an organization of patients that would fight for lower drug prices? And she said yes. So here we are.
All right. I could talk to you about the organization for hours and hours, but we're really here to talk about this report, the truth about insulin prices. So, Lauren, let me ask you, as a person who lives with type 1 diabetes, what do you get out of this report? What's the takeaway here?
Well, Stacey, I will tell you, when I first read this report, it was kind of shocking. I knew the prices of insulin were out of control, but just seeing it all written down and laid out like that was kind of horrifying for me as a patient. And I know when people in the community saw it, it was kind of the same feeling, like seeing the chart with the prices just going up and up and up, and reading about the 300% increases and all this and that. It was really like startling, but really good information, but kind of heartbreaking at the same time.
Lauren, let's go through this a little bit, because in the report, you all aren't pulling punches. I mean, there's a section here that's headlined price gouging and price fixing. Tell us about that.
So not pulling punches. Yeah, there's a lot of facts in this. And I think that the facts kind of speak for themselves. The price gouging, when you're reading the report, you can see that the three companies, Eli Lilly, Sanofi, and Novo Nordisk, they've all been working together, it seems, in price fixing this insulin to keep raising the prices. And the report, our chart goes back to 2001, and you can see since then there's been this steady increase from all three of them. It's just crazy. I mean, I can't put into words how exactly it makes me feel, but David might be able to speak a little more to the history of the price gouging and fixing.
Well, the fact of the matter is that those three companies have managed to take control of the global insulin market and they have effectively blocked other competitors from entering the market with enough competition to actually drive down prices. And rather than compete with each other on price, they are content to maintain market shares and divide up the profits and be able to keep raising their prices in lockstep. It's very important to look at that chart and see whether or not they talk to each other and say, hey, we're going to raise our price 15% next month, or not. They can each see what the other one is doing. And clearly none of the three is willing to lower the price in order to try and steal market share. They're content to keep high profits and divide them up. We're going to have to break that cartel in order to lower prices or develop the ability to negotiate with the three directly, which is why legislation to permit direct negotiation by Medicare in this country for lower prices is so important.
One of the things that strikes me when you use words like cartel and gouging and fixing is, why hasn't the government already stepped in? If this is so blatantly obvious, right? Why hasn't the government stepped in and said, you cannot do this?
Apparently, I'm not a lawyer. Apparently, unless they get on the phone and say, we're going to move our prices 15% all at once and talk to each other about it, they are allowed to do shadow pricing under our current law. And they're allowed to see what the other one is doing and then just match the price, as long as they don't talk about it. You can see what they're doing. It's obvious. But under law, if they don't talk to each other and collude, it's a harder case to prove. That's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer. To say, however, that the government isn't doing anything about it, you have to put one word behind it, and that is yet. Because there are plenty of bills in Congress that would tackle high drug prices and would allow, for example, Medicare to negotiate directly with the drug companies, including the insulin companies, for lower prices. And there are bills to encourage the development of more generic and biosimilar drugs that would provide additional competition that would also lower prices. So there is a recognition that this is a problem. But as with every one of the drugs we're fighting for lower prices for, enough has not been done yet. We have much more work to do. The fact is, in our system, drugs are supposed to get a period of time to make a lot of money when a new drug comes to market, and then we introduce competition through generics and biosimilars to make prices go down. Insulin is the exact opposite. We introduced these three drugs, and instead of prices going down because of competition, they just continue to go up. And it's because of the abuses these companies engage in. Legislators recognize it, and I believe that within the next couple of years, we will succeed in making insulin look like the more normal model of high prices end and prices go down.
One of the things that I think is really interesting in this report are the personal stories, because it's not just numbers, which are great and useful information, but there are faces and names of people who have rationed insulin, who talk about the struggle to afford it. And Lauren, I mentioned that you live with type 1 diabetes, and you have for more than 20 years. Can you talk about your experiences and of the people that you know as well? Because I know you have to know people who've really been in tough spots.
Yeah, and I always say that I am definitely one of the lucky ones, because I've always had help and support with paying for my insulin, and I've had my parents to fall back on, but especially through my work at P4AD, I've heard stories about, we were talking with a patient yesterday who has to sometimes not pay her electricity bill so that she can afford her insulin every month. And I just hear so many stories like that every day, and it's awful. And I mean, Stacey, you know, in the community, I think there's been, I want to say 8, is it 8? We don't, there's been multiple people who have passed away, I think 5 in the last year from rationing insulin. And it's just incredible that this can happen in America. I can't believe it. And like I said, I talk to people every day that are rationing their insulin, and it's just outrageous and heartbreaking. And like we say to legislators when we're on the Hill, or we hear in our stories, like, insulin isn't optional for us, and rationing isn't an option at all, or it shouldn't be an option that people have to do, something that they have to do.
I think one of the ways in which my eyes have been opened in the last few years is, when we're fortunate like you and I, Lauren, to have insurance, right? I go and I get my supply and my insurance pays for it, and it's $25 for me. It's no big deal here and there. But then there was a time where we were one bottle short, and they said, okay, $300 for that one vial of insulin.
Right.
And you think, who is paying these prices, right? It seems like, well, everybody I know has insurance. So even though the list price is $300, are people really paying that? And you come to find out, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the system is so complicated that even if you have insurance sometimes, you are paying list price or you're paying different prices. Is that something that you found as well?
List prices are really important because A, there are people who are uninsured, and B, when you're on a high deductible plan, you're paying list prices until you meet your deductible. So if you have a $5,000 deductible, then you are paying those list prices until you hit that 5,000 marks. And you know how many bottles of insulin someone may need in the first month of the year. I mean, that could be pretty close to $5,000, and a lot of people don't have that out of pocket. So,
well, and I would add that in some plans, insurance plans, even after you meet the deductible, you will have a copayment or coinsurance, and frequently that's based on list price. That's certainly true in Medicare. You pay all of your out-of-pockets based on list price. So list price really matters, and I think it is somewhere in the range of 65% of people who pay for some or all of their medications through the year based on list price.
David, you mentioned earlier some solutions. You said yet. I really liked that when you said there's no solutions yet. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that Congress is considering? And also, you mentioned a couple of them, but how people who are listening can try to make a difference. Am I calling up my representative and saying, vote on this? Am I writing letters? What can we do?
Well, you can come to patientsforaffordabledrugs.org and share your story with us, because we will see to it that the story gets put to work, making the case for why this problem needs to be addressed. And then if they're interested, we'll be in touch after they leave their story, not for money, because we don't ask patients for money, but to let them know of times that they can call or write their member of Congress or state legislator to speak up for reforms. What are some of the reforms? There is a bill in Congress right now, and it may be voted on in coming weeks, called H.R. 3, which is a very comprehensive bill in the House of Representatives that would allow Medicare to negotiate over drug prices and would set as a cap a number that is no higher than 120% of what 6 other wealthy nations pay for their drugs. This would lower prices in this country dramatically, because we pay 2 to 3 times what other countries pay for their drugs. H.R. 3 has other good features. It would cap out-of-pockets for people on Medicare. It would include inflation caps, so that prices can't be raised more than inflation year over year. There's a bill in the Senate that is bipartisan, being championed by Senators Grassley and Wyden, that would have inflation caps, again, making sure that drug makers can't price gouge by capping increases year over year at the rate of inflation. And the Trump administration has thrown its support behind the Senate bill. And the Trump administration may be about to bring forward a proposal only covering Part B drugs. Those are drugs administered by doctors and nurses in hospitals or doctors' offices that would use reference pricing, international reference pricing, to literally lower the price of Part B drugs. It's a small sliver of drugs. It's only a pilot program, but it's very significant that the administration has brought this idea forward. So there are a number of proposals that are floating around. There are a number of other dynamics in play right now, and I'm laughing. It's not funny, but there is a lot of obviously political energy being sucked out of the room by the impeachment process and the partisanship that exists. But I can tell you for sure that if Democrats and Republicans, both in Congress and in the White House, could get a deal on drug pricing, they would all really like it because there's so much anger and energy around this issue. They want to go home and campaign on having done something. So we are trying to leverage that political energy to see if we can get something done before we get too deep into the election year in 2020, when it will become increasingly difficult.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It really does. I'm curious, and I don't want to be a devil's advocate here, but and I know there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of energy, as you say, but I'm trying to think of a time where we actually made progress on medical pricing and things like that. And I mean progress where prices came down and access improved in the last generation or so. Not to say it can't happen now, but has it happened? Have we had success in any of these things?
No, we actually have the most expensive healthcare system in the world. Some people think we have the best healthcare system in the world, but we don't actually. We have the most expensive healthcare system in the world. Other countries have found a way not only to pay less for their drugs, but to pay less for all of the elements of healthcare and still have better health outcomes, longer life expectancy. We have a system that is built in many ways, not only the drug pricing system, but the whole system is in many ways built to benefit the people who make money on it more than benefit the people who it's supposed to serve. So we have hope on drug pricing because 90% of Americans say they want Congress to do something about it. Democrats, Republicans, and independents. There is enormous energy. It's the only reason that there's hope because pharmaceutical industry is probably spending about $1 billion a year to fight anything that would lower drug prices. And the amount of money that our side has is dwarfed by that $1 billion. But what they don't have, and we do, is a very angry electorate demanding that the people who they send to Washington and state capitals do something. That's what gives us hope. And that's why having people speak out is so important.
Lauren, let me ask you. You have been at Patients for Affordable Drugs for not too long, a couple of months now.
Since August. Yeah.
Since August. Okay. Are you more hopeful than when you walked in the door?
Definitely. I don't know if that's because of the political timing, but I can tell you, these people, if anyone's going to get it done, it's this group and our advocates. We have strong voices. And to echo what David said before, something that we have that pharma and the pharmaceuticals don't have are these compelling patient stories. And I think we're doing a really good job at making sure they're heard on the Hill and that something needs to change. And I'm definitely hopeful that something is on the horizon. There is not a more deserving cause, I think, than lowering drug prices so that people can afford to live. So I'm very hopeful.
Thank you both so much for spending some time with me. We will link up the full report, as we have in the past, and information how people can get in touch and share their stories. But I really appreciate it. And thanks for fighting the good fight.
Thank you, Stacey, very, very much.
Thank you.
Information on everything they talked about at diabetes-connections.com. Click on the homepage to learn more about Patients for Affordable Drugs, the legislation that they talked about. I'll link up some Insulin for All hashtag stuff as well, some other resources that are out there. And of course, I will also link up to Spare a Rose that I talked about at the very beginning of the episode. I know Valentine's Day is just about here as this episode airs. It's tomorrow, but it is not too late. And of course, the Spare a Rose initiative will continue for a few weeks after Valentine's Day as well. So please, if you can, take part. Back next week with our longer interview episodes. Those drop on Tuesday. And I'm going to be talking to the guys behind the new book that's coming out. They have a podcast too, Mastering Diabetes. And I don't know if you've seen these guys. Their claim to fame, their big trademark is they're like, eat 500 carbs of fruit. And I had to talk to them because it could not possibly be that simple. Of course it was not. But they really were fun to talk to. It was an interesting conversation. It didn't go quite in the way I thought because sometimes there's a lot of snake oil out there. This is not that. They are the real deal. They are the real different deal. but it was great to talk to them. That's on Tuesday. And then next Thursday, we will have another mini-sode, and that will not be an interview episode as I just did. And that'll be back to just me talking about one topic for 10 or 15 minutes. I love doing these. They're so much fun. I've learned a lot already in just the last couple of weeks, and I hope you're enjoying them too. If you have a topic that you'd like me to talk about or a question you'd like answered, please let me know, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com, or you can just go ahead and post in the Facebook group. I have so many fun interviews lined up. I'm so excited for the weeks to come, but I always want to listen to you and deliver what you would like to hear. So if you've got something, please, please, please let me know. All right, I am Stacey Simms. I will see you back here on Tuesday. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.